Hello, and thank you for joining our Indigenous Connections broadcast. This series of educational videos is focused on Indigenous communities and enhancing our connections with each other in the conservation field. Previous broadcasts have covered topics like celebrating Native American heritage, developing land acknowledgements, co-stewardship, traditional ecological knowledge, and so much more. My name is Sarah Gannon. I'll be your host today from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's National Conservation Training Center in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And before moving to our broadcast, I would like to acknowledge that the National Conservation Training Center is located on the unceded ancestral lands of many Indigenous peoples. While we could not find a full account, we are aware that many peoples traversed, cherished, and lived on this land. They include the Massawomack, the Haudenosaunee, the Shawnee, and the Delaware. As we learn more about the Indigenous peoples who continue to have relationships with this land, we better appreciate the good earth on which we work, live, and learn. We pledge to grow and sustain relationships with Indigenous communities through collaboration on our training, outreach, youth programs, museum exhibits, and more. We encourage others to learn more about the land on which they work and reside. In today's broadcast, we'll hear from biologist and raptor rehabilitator Janie Veltkamp, the founding director of Birds of Prey Northwest, and from Cameron Heusser with the Coeur d'Alene Tribe's Wildlife Management Program. They'll speak to us about their partnership to build the tribe's first eagle aviary. We will also hear about the cultural connection the tribe has to eagles and what it takes to care for birds that cannot be released back into the wild. Before we wrap up, we'll be joined by a special raptor guest, a live Merlin, so stay with us, you won't want to miss it. Cameron Heusser is the Wildlife Division lead for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe and has worked in the tribe's Fish and Wildlife program for 23 years. He holds a bachelor's degree in wildlife science from Washington State University and a master's in fisheries resources from the University of Idaho. Much of the tribe's fish and wildlife work focuses on habitat restoration for native fish and wildlife species. The program also oversees monitoring the health of wildlife populations and regulating hunting and fishing activities across the reservation. Cam has been overseeing the tribe's eagle aviary since they were permitted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2016. We're also joined by Janie Veltkamp, who received training at the prestigious University of Minnesota Raptor Center, where her thesis where she learned how to expertly care for and treat medically injured birds of prey. She received her master's degree in biology from Purdue University, where her thesis investigated wintering bald eagle habitat in Indiana. Janie began reintroducing peregrine falcons in the Midwest, and more recently, ospreys and peregrines in South Dakota. Since then, she has treated thousands of injured birds of prey, and she lectures extensively about their ecology and travels with specially trained eagles, hawks, owls, and falcons. She works closely with Idaho Department of Fish and Game and is permitted for her work through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Janie's also a master falconer and has a bachelor's degree in nursing. She's the co-author of 2 award-winning children's books, Beauty and the Beak, How Science, Technology, and a 3D printed beak rescued a bald eagle, and the book Swoop and Soar, How Science Rescued 2 osprey orphans and found them a new family in the wild. Thank you both and welcome. We're grateful and excited that you're here. For those tuning in online, if you'd like to submit a question to us, please put it in the chat and we'll get to it. Let's start with some background. Cam, would you tell us a bit about your journey into raptor conservation?
Sure, I can do that. First of all, thanks for having me. Once again, it's Cam Heusser. I'm the Wildlife Division lead here for the Coeur d'Alene Tribe. Worked here for a little over 23 years now. A little bit of background, we're located in northern Idaho, about 30 miles south of the city of Coeur d'Alene. So the reservation is kind of centered on the southern end of the lake. It's a beautiful setting to work. We're right there kind of in the interface where the historical Palouse Prairie joins up against the forests of northern Idaho. And then you go further east and get into more of the Bitterroot Mountains into Montana. So that's the setting of where we work. Most of our work is focused on habitat restoration, making up for historical damage from the hydropower system for wetland mitigation, restoration of salmon, as well as a lot of other projects where we monitor the health of big game herds. We've worked on wolves, bears, wolverines, a lot of variety when you work for a tribe. As far as my first exposure to raptors, it was probably working with ospreys on the southern end of the lake. We do annual monitoring of osprey populations, chick counts, nest production. And then it seems like it was about 20 years ago when Janie moved onto the reservation, and things changed quickly after that. So we've worked with Janie now for a long time. Originally, we were helping out with bringing roadkill for her birds to eat, helped build some of the aviaries on her property, and it just kind of snowballed from there to where we are now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Janie, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you got into raptor conservation?
Well, it really started as I had an epiphany holding a peregrine falcon in 1990 atop a skyscraper. I thought, my stars, we can wipe you off the face of the earth, or we can destroy you with our careless habitats. Loss, I said, Mom, I'm not going to be a doctor. I switched my major to biology, and I've used my nursing and human medicine biology skills on raptors ever since, 35 years later.
Wonderful. How did the partnership between your organization, Birds of Prey Northwest, and the Coeur d'Alene tribe come to be? Cam told us a little bit about the beginnings. Could you tell us some more?
Well, I knew I would need support and assistance, and I found that right in my own backyard with the Coeur d'Alene tribe. And a couple of these biologists who didn't know they were in training at the time, but as it worked out, they had their dose of working with aviary construction, being around birds, having to help feed them, etc. So in hindsight, it was a good entree for the tribe and our partnership to end us up where we are today with tribal eagle aviaries.
Thank you. Cam, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add, I think it was Janie that actually became aware of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service permit that enabled us to do this first. She brought it to our attention, and it seems like we kind of talked it over and stumbled over that for maybe at least a year, trying to figure it out if it was something we could actually do. But without Janie here, I'm sure we wouldn't have worked up the courage to do it.
Partnerships are really important in boosting one another's skill sets, for sure.
That's fantastic. As one of the first tribal aviaries in the region, could you tell us a little bit about what obstacles you had to overcome and why you wanted to do this in the first place? I'll direct that to Cam.
Okay. Yeah, definitely the one big hurdle is finding somebody to fill the role of the primary caretaker for the aviary. So there's some pretty specific requirements there. You have to meet a minimum of 300 hours of training, working hands-on with birds. You have to be endorsed by a veterinarian as well as, I believe, another caretaker. So finding somebody who wants to do that with those specific traits is very difficult. So we're fortunate enough to have Janie right here on the reservation that already had all of that experience. So she could slip right into that role and then train us as staff that handles the daily duties of feeding and cleaning for the birds underneath her. So it worked out well.
And what has it meant to the Coeur d'Alene to have the eagles on the reservation?
So the main intent was just to allow quick, direct access to feathers. Without the aviary here, tribal members have to go to the federal repository, which, depending on their requests, if they want a whole bird or a specific aged bird, it can take several years. So by having the birds here, we collect their feathers during the molting period. roughly May through September. We pick up those feathers, we bring them back to the office, catalog and organize those, and then tribal members can put in applications. We take those as we receive them. When it's their turn, we give them a call. They come right into the office. They can hand pick the feathers they want. And we have it down now so that it only takes a matter of days or maybe a couple of weeks during the busier time period. So it's a big time saving, and they can pick out specifically the feathers that they want.
And I skipped ahead a little bit in our conversation, but I know eagles are icons of strength and liberty, and the importance to Native cultures is cannot be understated. And we at the Fish and Wildlife Service strive to ensure that Native Americans have adequate access to these culturally important birds. When we spoke previously, you highlighted that there's only one federal repository that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has in Oregon, and it can be very slow to provide tribes with access due to the high demand. Are there any additional benefits to having eagles on tribal land?
Yeah, a couple things I would say. One, it's nice. We have programs where schools can come in and just seeing the birds up close. It's a good education and outreach activity. You don't often get that opportunity to be standing 15 feet away from an eagle. The other thing, hopefully, it's hard to measure, but it's the hope that it could potentially reduce things like poaching of birds. Somebody goes out and wants the feathers. It happens still every once in a while where somebody will poach a bird and collect the feathers or potentially try to sell those on the black market. So by having live birds that molt their feathers year after year, hopefully it would cut down on those types of illegal activities as well.
Janie, do you have anything you'd like to add before we meet your guest?
I think the points that Cameron made are very important about expanding the conservation mechanism of these permits for tribal eagle aviaries. And something the general public doesn't seem to understand is that eagles and all raptors molt their feathers each year. Now, eagles don't have a complete molt each year, but those feathers are shed each year, providing a resource for tribal folks that need access to feathers for their ceremonial purposes.
Thank you. And we'll take a minute to let Janie get her guest, and then she'll tell us a bit more about the mission of her organization, the Birds of Prey Northwest.
Well, Birds of Prey has been a nonprofit conserving raptors for 32 years now, and we certainly do run a clinic for injured wild eagles, hawks, owls, falcons, and osprey, providing them the medical attention they need. But more importantly, we have a strong educational component to Birds of Prey Northwest. We house some 23 permitted permanent raptors through U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Idaho Fish and Game that are teaching specimens. We take these live raptors in the classroom and we teach children, 3rd through 6th grades, our target audience, the importance of these birds in our environment and their natural history and the conservation measures that they can take. This here happens to be a merlin, a dark-phased merlin, a fairly common falcon throughout North Idaho. And she's this training bird that goes into the classroom teaching children the importance of small falcons and large falcons alike. So these children grow up seeing who they share their world with and understanding what dangers they face in a modern day world. Like Madeline the merlin here. She's a human imprint, which is a big problem in Birds of Prey. Humans find these birds as youngsters and they interact with them trying to feed them and thereby rendering them non-releasable. Human imprinting of raptors is something that's a big problem for them, and it's irreversible, unlike other species of birds. So these birds have few options except to become teaching birds. And that's the case with Madeline here, the merlin from Montana. She'll join our teaching team and teach children the importance of falcons in our environment
Thank you. It's wonderful to meet Madeline. And I want to go back to something that you said about having training, people who have been trained and are available to work with birds. Is that one of the biggest challenges that you face, Cam?
Yep, definitely. Related to that is also we don't have a specific stream of funding designated to this. So we're also not only looking for somebody that is interested or has all of that training, but somebody who might be willing to do it for free. So that makes it difficult. We've tried to set up some training programs. Janie's been kind and willing enough to train tribal members or other local community members to look towards the future and think about who might be willing to take over. And we haven't had much luck. We've had a couple people start and go out and work with her and volunteer to work towards those hours. But I mean, 300 hours is a pretty big requirement for somebody who might already have another job too.
So is the 300 hours what's required to be? You mentioned the primary caretaker, and that's a necessary mandatory piece of the equation.
Yep, that's a specific requirement for the tribal eagle aviary permit.
And we have a related question from the audience. Mama Sue asks if there are residents of the Coeur d'Alene community who will work with Fish and Wildlife Service and become trainers themselves. Working with you at the Tribal Wildlife Agency is probably where we want to start. So you kind of answered that, but do you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, every once in a while we'll get requests for volunteers and people who are interested. Usually it doesn't pan out. People will come in and they'll realize, well, a volunteer means I come in and I get to cut up some fish or some rats every day and feed the birds, and that's all there is to it. And I think people are looking for something a little bit more glamorous, but you do have to start out with the basics and work up. So we haven't had anybody up to this point that's willing to see it through.
Thank you. And we have a follow-up related question from the audience asking whether the federal government could bridge the gap and find resources to pay for an aviation expert. Yeah, so we were speaking yesterday a little bit about looking at opportunities that we might be able to find for training. And I don't know of any grants that exist from the federal side to pay for a primary caretaker. Are you all aware of anything like that at the moment?
Not at the moment. Yeah, we're constantly looking for avenues to bring in funding for this work, but haven't had much luck yet.
Yeah, something to keep an eye on. And this is another question for the two of you, whoever wants to take this one first. If you had one or two key takeaways for others who were just beginning to work on developing their own aviary, or even just beginning a tribal partnership between a nonprofit, say like Janie's organization and the Tribal Wildlife Agency, what advice would you give?
I guess I could start and then Janie can chime in, but I would say be willing to start small. I know there's another tribe in the region who started with just one red-tailed hawk. And if it's something you're interested in, I would suggest reaching out and just searching to see if there's a local wildlife rehabilitator that might be willing to help out and get you started in serving as the primary caretaker like Janie did. If you can find somebody like that, and if you're willing to start with something even as small as one bird, it's not too much to undertake.
And obtaining these permits is really a process that begins with obtaining the federal permits from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, having a plan in place that includes a financial plan to the cost of designing and building these aviaries, which have to meet certain federal requirements depending on how many large-sized birds are kept per square foot. And then, of course, finding, as Cameron said, the staff to care for these birds. and it's all a process that one has to realize that when they set forth on this journey.
Thank you.
Yep,
And can you tell us, go ahead.
I was just going to say the permitting part of the process is actually the easiest part. All of the paperwork, that was pretty painless and quick.
That's good to hear. I'm wondering, you mentioned start small, Cam. How did you guys start, and how many eagles do you have currently? And in a few minutes, we'll get to see a video that shows a bit of the aviary being built and what it looks like today. But tell us a little bit about the day in and day out.
So as far as getting started, we initially started, I think, with 2 bald eagles and 2 golden eagles. And that was in 2016. We housed those on Janie's property in aviary enclosures that she already had built. So under the permit, the birds were tied to the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and she housed those for about 2 years. That 2 years allowed us to start doing kind of an initial property search, looking for someplace that was secure enough so that the birds wouldn't have too much outside disturbance, but not so busy that they were always disturbed, and not too far out. We had to worry about things like vandalism. So we located a property and started building the enclosure and did it all with in-house staff. We had some technicians on board that had skills with construction, had somebody with a little bit of architecture experience. So we slowly built the enclosure where they are today. Currently, we have 4 bald eagles and 1 golden eagle. According to the space requirements, we have space for 14, but we don't have plans to fill it that full. It's a lot more care and food requirements that way. We're pretty happy with the 5 we have right now.
And these are birds that cannot be rehabbed and released back into the wild?
Yes, they're all
I should
injured.
say there's quite a large population of birds that have no viable future in the wild. So all of these birds, just like you met Madeline, have a permanent disability, as do all the tribal eagles that get placed, that prevents them from going back to the wild. So it gives them another alternative to exist.
Is there a need for additional tribal aviaries in terms of placement for these birds?
I would say yes. We are on an email list where we get announcements when eagles become available. And I don't even open them anymore. There's so many emails that come through of birds that are available. So yeah, I don't know what the right number is, but they could use a lot more places to put birds.
No doubt.
And I'm wondering if there's a network of other tribal aviaries. Janie mentioned that there are just a handful that exist nationally. And I wonder if you all collaborate. How do you work together?
I think when we received the permit, there were 6 or 7 before us in the nation, and they were all in the Arizona, Oklahoma region. Since then, there's 1 more permitted in the state of Washington, and I'm not sure if there's been others more recently than that. We talk frequently with the nearest aviary in Washington, just about plans and future plans, expansion, those types of things. We've been down to tour 2 of the aviaries in Oklahoma just to kind of pick their brains about staffing and funding and other issues they've gone through. But as far as networking or work groups, that type of thing, that doesn't exist at this point in time.
Thank you. And I see that we have a suggestion from the audience. Martin Tyner of the Southwest Wildlife Fund is a potential funder. Are either of you familiar with that organization?
No.
No.
No, okay. So we'll have to do some research on that and see what opportunities there may be. Janie, do you have anything to add to this question about what key takeaways you might have for folks who are just getting started?
Well, as Cam alluded to earlier, it's really important to seek out the main primary caretaker and the person with those 300 hours before you even get started. So look for a federally permitted rehabilitation facility, often associated with the university, or standalone, such as Birds of Prey Northwest. Those are the folks that are most likely to have those kind of hours and experience working with eagles and other raptors. So that would be the first part of the equation I would want in place just after I received my permits. So it's a process, and those two steps would be the first.
Thank you. And we don't have any more incoming questions from the audience. Let me see if we can prompt to get a few more in. We do have a 10-minute video coming up to give you all an overview of this aviary. And it sounds like it took from 2016, you began in 2016. Was it 2 full years from starting a permit until having birds present in your aviary?
Yeah, it was almost exactly 2 years. I don't remember all the exact key points along the way, but it took quite a while to build the enclosure they're in now. It's fairly good size. I think it's 75 by 25 feet. There's a covered outside viewing area enclosed with chain link fence. We also had to prepare a room with a walk-in freezer where the food is stored, get some plumbing in for a sink so we can clean. There's also a classroom there, so when teachers bring their kids out, we've got a room with a TV. We can give presentations, some desks set up, and some decor and exhibits around the room. So it's a pretty good environment out there for hosting groups to come visit.
And how many school groups or kids or people come through on an average basis? Do you know?
I could give you a rough number. Yeah, usually it's kind of May through October. We'll probably have at least one every other week, it seems like. Yeah, not as much as Janie does, but consistent flow.
Neat. And Randy Robinson, who's one of our education outreach folks on staff, asks, what are the main sources of food for the birds?
Well, you have to consider the different diet of the two types of eagles for sure. The golden eagle is a mammalian predator, often feeding on rabbits, squirrel, fox, etc. And the bald eagle prefers fish and or red meat. So, and to have these birds food store in advance requires freezer space and some forethought as to how do you obtain their food source.
Thank you. Is there anything that you might recommend that we be aware of, or something that surprised you, or something that you learned culturally about collaborating with the tribe on the reservation that you might want to share, or based on your experience more broadly?
Well, I like to remind everyone that it's illegal for us to possess feathers of raptors as migratory birds, and the only folks that are allowed to possess them legally are Native American tribes. And so these mechanisms for obtaining feathers are very important for them culturally. And it's important to explain to the public why those laws are in place, why some of us are not allowed to possess feathers. For instance, it might support the black market trade. And for those of us that are allowed to have feathers, such as tribal mechanisms.
Thank you. Cam, do you have anything you'd like to add?
As far as just the cultural component?
Things that have helped you or surprised you in your learning?
I don't know that anything's really surprised me. As far as the people seem to be pretty happy with the program here. We've received nothing but positive feedback. And I wasn't sure when we started if it would just be an initial surge of requests for feathers and then die off, but it's been pretty consistent. You can see some patterns through the year, especially in the spring with graduations. When the high school seniors are done, we get a lot of requests. That's probably our most popular time. And then as far as just little things about which type, which species and color of feather people request, I don't know that I've really seen much of a pattern of just people have their own personal preference.
Thank you. And for your birds, go right ahead.
I was just going to add that even though raptors have 8,000 feathers as individuals, those feathers most coveted are probably those tail feathers and primary wing feathers, in addition to whole body parts. I'm throwing that out as a question to Cameron.
Yeah, good question. The ones that people are the most highly sought after are those juvenile golden eagle feathers. Those are the classic kind of half dark, half white on the tail. And then as they age, that white band starts to shrink until it's just full brown or kind of mottled brown. People are always asking for those. And the golden eagle that we do have now, we got him as a juvenile. So we had 3 or 4 years of those real nice feathers, but now he's kind of aged out of that. So that's one thing we are looking for. If it comes available, we are in the market for another juvenile golden eagle, but there's a lot more bald eagles that come available than there are the golden. So those are harder to find.
And can you tell us a bit about where your 4 birds came from?
Yeah, they're all fairly local. The bald eagles, let's see. Bald eagles are all either Idaho or Washington. One was just found a few miles from my house. It was a friend of mine who was farming and found that one out in the field. Somebody had shot it. It had a pellet in its wing. The other 2, Janie brought, well, the other 3 are actually all from Janie, transfers to us that she took in as first-year birds. The golden eagle we picked up in Central Oregon from a rehabilitator down near Bend. So all the ones we've had over the years are all within the Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana area.
And it sounds like the golden eagles are rarer to encounter for placement with you all or with other aviaries. Is that true? More bald eagles, I think is what I heard.
It's based on the population base. There are many more bald eagles in the lower 48 than there are golden eagles, for sure.
And Janie, when you transferred your birds over to the tribe, how soon was it before you had replacements?
Well, I like to remind folks that federally permitted rehabilitators at best save about 50% of their admissions on a good day. So that leaves quite a large pool of those birds which cannot be returned to the wild. And so the replacements, I have several on the property that will be offered up to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service again here just in the last 6 months. So 3 of them in the waiting just at our facility in North Idaho. So sad to say there are a lot of non-releasable eagles that need placement.
And when you say you have some that are ready for release to the Fish and Wildlife Service, does that mean they're dying, they're about to die, or does that mean you're getting them permitted?
No, that means they're deemed non-releasable, and they will be offered to all the 9 existing tribal aviaries first through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They're quite healthy. They're just non-releasable based on a disability they have that prevents them from flying, usually, and prevents them from hunting.
Okay, thank you. That's super interesting to learn that they go through from you as a rehabilitator to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then they can be placed with their forever home where they'll be. I didn't realize that rehabilitators sort of have a pipeline that you work through. Let's see, we have a hello from National Eagle Repository staff in Commerce City, Colorado. What a great presentation from Shannon Connors. And we are just about at time for transitioning to our 10-minute video. Do you all have any other burning facts you'd like to share or pieces of information you'd like this audience to know before we switch to the video?
Well, I will just say that partnering with other entities such as our nonprofit and the tribe and others who have helped along the way lessens the load for all the participants. So partnering is a good way to start, looking for partners, even unexpected partners. So like I said, that lessens the load for each component to finally achieve your objective.
Thank you. Cam, it looked like you had something you wanted to add.
No, I was just going to say I couldn't come up with any other burning questions or notes. No.
Bases covered. Okay, great. I wanted to share with our audience that there's another broadcast that showcases our Eagle repository for those who are interested in learning more about the process and the backlog. It's available on the website. Thank you, Shannon, for that reminder. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Janie and Cam, for sharing with us today. We hope you can all join us next month on September 18th at 3 p.m. Eastern for our next Indigenous Connections broadcast. And please stay with us to enjoy a 10-minute video on the history and purpose of the Coeur d'Alene Aviary created by the Coeur d'Alene Wildlife Department. As a final reminder, each broadcast is recorded and available on NCTC's website. If you wish to learn about this broadcast series or be added to our listserv, please email Jennifer_Hill, Hill, at fws.gov. We also welcome your suggestions for additional topics, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Yep. Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you both.
In the old stories, each animal had the opportunity to sit down with the Creator and say, this is what I have. This is my power. This is what I can give. Eagle was one of those that said, I'm the biggest. I'm the strongest. I can fly the highest. My strength is what I can provide to help these people. For that, I can give a part of myself. And in honor of that, here's something the people can use. And a feather was laid down.
The eagle is something that's to be revered and respected, and it's kind of just assumed in all these stories that that's who Eagle is and who Eagle was. And those stories are thousands of years old, so clearly for thousands of years the Coeur d'Alene people have thought that about eagles from their perspective since time immemorial, since the time of Coyote and the rest of the animals that traveled the earth.
We have the Migratory Bird Act. We have the Bald Eagle Protection Act, and those really prohibited a lot of our use of eagles in whole or in part, any kind of pieces, anything. And with the Native American Religious Freedom Act, it kind of cleared up a path for us to be able to continue our cultural practices without so much interference.
The United States government recognized the significance of the eagle to Indian people. They were a protected bird, by the United States, they allowed special privileges to the Indian nations to own eagle feathers. And we had to go to a repository.
And that's supposed to take care of 570 some tribes. And it's a very slow process. And I've been through the permitting process twice, and it's taken over 4 years each time that I went.
We wanted to set up our own program and become our own repository. So any birds or any parts that were available to the tribe would be available to Coeur d'Alene tribal members first.
Back in 2016, we were awarded the Tribal Eagle Aviary Permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This just allowed us the ability as a tribe to house our own eagles and provide the feathers that they shed each year to tribal members, and they could just circumvent the long wait times at the National Repository.
To be able to give tribal members access directly to eagle feathers is obviously an immense benefit to having this aviary here.
I think it means a lot to the people that they don't have to go through the federal government anymore. They can just get their feathers right here through the tribe.
The Coeur d'Alene tribe was the first tribe in the region to start a program like this. At the time, there were about 6 or 7 other tribes that also ran their own aviaries, and they were located down in the southwest in Oklahoma and Arizona.
The opportunity came for the Coeur d'Alene tribe to invest in and to build an eagle repository and to take care of these special birds, these spiritual birds. The tribal council, the staff, everyone jumped at the chance, pitched in, and built that building that houses eagles today.
It's come full circle for me. Where I was born and raised is where this aviary now sits. The lands that I walked as a child, the creek that I fished and swam in as a child, is right next to a facility that preserves and protects the animals that were here before people were.
To be eligible for this program, a bird has to have an injury that will prevent it from ever being rehabilitated and released into the wild. So we end up with these birds for the rest of their lives.
Initially, you kind of feel bad for them because they are birds that are injured. And you feel like they don't belong in a cage, but it does prolong their life, and we do benefit from the birds.
When you understand that the eagles are not going to fly again, they're not going to be able to be returned to the wild, I think that becomes the natural thing for the tribes, in this case the Coeur d'Alene tribe, to be the caretaker.
Well, I think it's beautiful, definitely, that we have the Eagle program. And it's kind of great to see that the eagle feather is, coming back into our tribe.
The body parts of the eagle often were used in different ceremonies and in different ways to kind of emulate the eagles and their importance, certainly elevated to a level that's beyond just what other animals are and have been.
An eagle is revered. It's revered throughout Indian country. Indeed, if you go to any powwow, any gathering of Indian nations, you'll see an eagle staff. It's almost like our national standard now. In Indian country, I'd say that the eagle staff is the flag for the nations.
We try to use all the pieces that we can, every single part of the bird that we can, all the way from the claws to, the bones.
And to identify the individual, to identify his prowess, to identify his deeds, they would honor him by giving him a feather. It was an honor because this is one that flew as high and as close to the Creator as anyone else.
In the old days, you were, you earned your feathers, and in modern times, we still kind of do earn our feathers for different reasons, and it can be because of birth or, marriage or graduations.
There's a individual that said, I'm going to give you this, and this is why. And it's your responsibility to preserve and protect and take care of this.
Feathers are usually handed down in families too, because of the great care that's taken with how they're stored and used. They can last for generations.
Bald eagles are widespread in the wild, especially here on the reservation. We have a very robust population of bald eagles, and nationally they've fully recovered. They're no longer listed under the Endangered Species Act, and they're a relatively common sight, especially along rivers and water bodies. Golden eagles, they're not doing quite as well. They're not endangered, but their populations haven't recovered to the extent that bald eagles have.
Well, as the eagle expert for the Coeur d'Alene tribe, I'm responsible for the well-being of their eagles, for their health, their weight, their talons, and their beaks. Twice a year, we must grab up the eagles and give them pedicures and trim their beaks, which tend to overgrow in captivity naturally.
Each bird eats a pound of food per day. Our bald eagles, being lake and species you find near the water, they eat primarily fish, and so we feed them fish that we collect from the lake. Our fisheries program has a northern pike suppression program, so they're out gill netting for northern pike, and they provide the fish to us. That's primarily what we feed. And their enclosure, as you can see, is designed more for a water-associated species. We have a pond in there, and the bald eagles will frequently bathe in their water baths and spend a lot of time in and around the water. The golden eagle, on the other hand, golden eagles are a more inland species. You find them in rocky, higher elevation country. So their enclosures, we've included a bit more rock features and more of a stream as opposed to a pond. Golden eagles eat red meat exclusively. So in the wild, they'll hunt things like rabbits and small game. Here, we feed them red meat that we get primarily through roadkill or other donations.
Eagles, they can live up to 50 years in captivity, so it's a big commitment that we're undertaking here. They will probably outlive our careers.
Obviously, I think there's an opportunity to connect our people to much closer to those animals.
We're able to bring our children, to bring our elders to visit it, and they're overwhelmed. They know the significance of the eagle. They know the spirituality of the eagle. They know the majesty of the eagle, and it's our national standard. And we're just fortunate to have that facility as we have it today.
Take a little bit of time. Go down and see the birds. Go down and sit and talk with them. They have a voice. They have a message. And they can share just like they did in those old times.